So what happens in large organizations is that we are only rewarded by success. And when you have a culture that punishes failure, you cannot drive innovation in that company.
This is episode number 53 of The Inspiring Talk with Lalit, Jagtiani. Welcome guys to The Inspiring Talk. My name is Gautam. I'm host for this show. Each week I interview today's most successful and inspiring personalities to help you realize your inner potential. Hey guys, I'm very excited for today's episode with Lalit Jagtiani. Lalit is a business transformation specialist and a thought leader in digital strategy at SAP Singapore. He is also an author of the book When Change Happens, a story of organizational change. He has a passion for filmmaking and has pursued a diploma in filmmaking. Over the years, he has scripted and directed numerous videos and TV spots. He is the chief mentor for LeadThink, a digital platform for leaders and professionals to showcase their capabilities through personal experiences in driving successful transformation in their organizations. In this episode, we discuss about how organizations can drive change more effectively, how to enable innovative thinking within the organization, what does digital disruption means to the existing organizations, and how can they be prepared for this, and a lot more. Guys, make sure to share this episode with your friends by visiting theinspiringtalk.com/5353. Now, without further ado, let me welcome Lalit Jagtiani. Welcome inside this episode, guys. I have Lalit Jagtiani chatting with me today. Lalit, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bijoy. And hello, everyone. And great to be on the show.
So, Lalit, you are a change agent, thought leader on digital transformation, and you also have a diploma in filmmaking. How did you get into filmmaking?
Yes. So, long ago, actually, and if you see throughout my career, I've had this need to constantly discover myself. And I think one of the things that I one of the outcomes of my self-discovery was this need to express myself in the visual medium. So I got very fascinated. I was actually working for, at that time, an oil and gas company in India. And I was leading their communications department. And at that point, this whole context around a video journal was a big thing. It started with news track, which was a kind of a video medium that we had used to create news and share news across the company all over India. So I kind of started making that news track because that sounded like a new way of communicating other than the house journal that I was editing. And that got me fascinated with this whole medium of film. And I kind of pursued that for about a year, did a diploma. And I think over the 5 years, I made about 70 ad films and corporate videos during that journey.
That's interesting. So that is a passion project of yours.
Yes. So the interesting thing is, you do different things in life. And my belief is at some point of time, you never realize when it all comes together. So this filmmaking kind of lasted for about 5 years. And then I went on to do other things. But now, this new platform that I've come with called LeadThink, we are actually using digital videos as a medium to collect stories on people who have been successful doing transformations. And so it's interesting that my hobby and my work have come together to create this interesting mix that is now the new startup that I'm a mentor of.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So Lalit, you have authored a book, When Change Happens. So what was the inspiration to write your book on change management?
Yes, that's an interesting journey for me. So when I started off, one fine day I was kind of invited by my company to lead and be a part of this transformation team of the company, and actually I was quite excited about that. But when I actually started this transformation journey, I realized there's a vast gap between the theory of a transformation and what actually happens when you're actually driving change in that particular project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the theory is based on a set of structured activities and assumes that all these activities people will fall in nice shape like a jigsaw puzzle. That means if I do a stakeholder analysis, I do some communication, everyone will fall in line, and the organization will be very excited about the change, and the world will be a better place.
Mm-hmm.
But it never always happens like that, because we need to understand organizations consist of people.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't come to an organization either to resist or accept change. They come in to do a job, and they come in to earn their bonus, and they come in to earn a return for their efforts that they're putting into the company. And
Mm-hmm.
moment you come in with an agenda of change, one of the biggest fears they have is, am I going to be successful with this new change that is coming in? Is that
Mm-hmm.
going to be impacting my job in a way that I will either land up losing it, or I'll end up becoming less successful or getting less bonus? That's one. The second is, as you go up the hierarchical ladder, you have people who have then come to an organization with political agendas. So their interest in knowing about change is, how does this align with my power base? Does that erode my ability or control of organization or people or assets or resources? Or does that allow me to build or grow and become better? So this power play dynamic that happens is another dimension. A
Mm-hmm.
third dimension comes from the business owners themselves. So if I'm the heading a business, I am actually measured by the performance of my business. And now suddenly I have somebody coming in to do a change management program or a workshop, taking away my salespeople from the field to do something
Mm-hmm.
that I think as a head of business is a waste of my time. It becomes a point of resistance. So then this whole change initiative is seen as an interruption to the business. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
thing is, with all these complexities, how does one actually navigate through this journey, and how do you kind of manage these personal and professional agendas that people have to drive a successful change? There was no book like that. There was no book that talked about these realities. They gave some theoretical ideas, they gave some constructs, which are very good to understand the concepts. But when you're actually executing it, it doesn't prepare you for the real world. So I thought probably one way of doing that was to actually put all my experiences into a book. Now, obviously, when you put that into a book, the risk you have is sharing confidential information of a company that you're not supposed to.
Yeah.
That is the reason why I wrote this book by creating a fictional company. Even the characters I have used are Hollywood characters, so nobody can claim I've talked about them. But each of those incidences that you see in the book or you read about are the ones that have actually happened, and what the interventions you see that were done was those that I personally or I have witnessed personally happening in the organization. So therefore, it's based on real experiences, but it then prepares people for this um, chaotic environment that typically you go into when you're trying to drive a change project. And it shows you one way of how you can navigate yourself using a very simple narrative. But if you kind of go behind the narrative, there are some deeper insights that you will get as you read.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, like change is not an overnight process and it takes a time, right? Because it is such a complex thing to do. I have heard of TPC metrics or technical, political, and cultural metrics in any organizational change. And you have already mentioned a bit about the political change and how people will react to the particular change. So which do you think is the toughest nut to crack? And what's been your experience like on that?
So the toughest nut to crack actually have been people who have been very successful in the organization, independent of the level. So if, for example, I'm this a C-level person in the company, and I have risen the ranks fairly successfully, I or I'm a high level performer in the company, and I've been very successful. These are the more difficult people to overcome. The reason being, as
So,
human beings,
technical and cultural are you think are more easier as compared to political one? Is it so?
Definitely. The reason why is because technical, you can easily be able to address it by fixing the technical flaws or technical challenges, if I may put it that way. If
Mhm.
you think of it from a cultural dimension, it's easy to kind of show people how you can be successful by adopting this new change, and you can start initiating, and there are many initiatives that you can do that can drive the cultural dynamics. The politics by very nature, either they come from fairly empowered people in the company in terms of either they're at a very senior leadership level or at a very influential level. Their play is never structured and their play is never logical. It's more structured around power equation and ego. So those dynamics are fairly complex and difficult to navigate.
So how do you deal with that kind of situations? What's been your experience like in dealing or navigating through that kind of issues within the organization, political issues?
So the first thing that one needs to, as a change agent, do is clearly understand and analyze this political agenda. So if you look at an individual and just listen to what they say, you will never get to understand the agenda that's behind them. So that fine art of understanding the political agenda behind the individual is the first thing that you need to understand as a change agent. Having understood that, then you need to look at three things. The first thing you need to look at is, in the course of this change, how does that have an impact on that particular agenda? And find out those areas where you think there is going to be a positive impact. And those are the things that you need to highlight to that particular stakeholder. If you're sensing that there's going to be a negative impact on the agenda and you are sensing that there's going to be an area where you're likely to encounter what we call political opposition, then the key is to find out the influencers or the people around this individual who can actually influence the shift. It would be either somebody of a higher power level or somebody who is connected to a set of parallel support mechanisms that the individual has to be able to kind of drive that influencing change on that power stakeholder. And that's why it's kind of an intricate game in a sense. But once you get a good handle of how to do it, you become fairly good at it.
This was about handling the people in power who seems like what's going to happen to the power they already have, or their value is going to diminishes with the upcoming changes, right? So if we
Yes.
look at the bench level worker or the ground level worker within any organizations, when you are driving these massive changes, you have to deal with employees definitely, and you have to bring them to agreement, right? One of those things, as we discussed, was to bring leaders into agreement or the people in power. And now, if we look at the ground level or these bench level worker, you have to bring them into agreement as well, right? One of those ways is giving the rational side or rational reasoning about the change and how that is going to help the organizational grow, giving facts and figures or numbers. That is one part, right? You can bring them to agreement with the rational. But again, there is another most challenging part, which is the emotional side of the employees, right? So how do you deal with the emotional aspect of employees while carrying out the massive organizational changes?
Yeah, I think one of the areas in my view where very little work has been done, and in my view, a lot more needs to do, is going down to what we typically call the operating level of the individual, where you are actually able to go to very clearly identify what is the nature of the job change for that individual and how does this impact that particular individual. The reason why I say that is because typically all our change projects are more focused on how does it benefit the organization. But what
Yes.
we forget to understand and realize is that an organization change can never be successful until the teams on the ground that are actually executing that change are successful themselves. So the first thing is, how do you work with individuals and making them successful? So it was very interesting in one of the and that's also there in my book. We started this whole change program, nothing to do with the agenda of change of the company, but it had more to do with how can I create change for myself because it's something that I truly want, and finding out what is it that I really want. So we started this whole piece around change. Um, using a context called foundations in organization learning. It's based on the work of Peter Senge. But what it does is we work with individuals to say, forget the organization for a couple of minutes and let's talk a bit about you to find out what is it that you are trying to do for yourself and your life. Because if you think of individuals, and many of us are there, we very early in life we are always leading what I typically call a directive of what we are expected to do. So as a child, my parents decide, whether I should go to school. Nobody asked me whether I wanted to go to school. My parents decide that. Then as I go into school, my teachers tell me what's the right way to do things and what's the wrong way to do things, so I tend to follow that. Then I go into college life, and probably there again I'm more following and falling in line with what my professors are expecting me to do. And then maybe when I get married, I may have a choice and I may not, but if I have a choice, I'm lucky, and I get happy. And then I go into corporate life, and again there it's more about my boss telling me what to do. So we are very good at meeting other people's expectations of us. That's been our survival in the past. But very often we never spend time with ourselves and say, what is it that I really want for myself? Why am I, what drives me, what brings me to work every morning, other than the responsibility, salary, and the children I'm looking after, and the wife I'm looking after, a husband? Once you start asking yourself that purpose, you start finding out one or two or three things in life that really personally are engaging and personally exciting for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be with your career, but going in that path of the discovery of what excites you creates an energy within yourself, and that energy gives you the capability to engage with the rest of whatever you're doing much better. So we call this concept personal mastery. And once you are focused on doing that, it energizes you and empowers you and allows you to take things on the way which are towards the path of where you want to go. And we found that, when we started doing these programs with people, that people actually came back to us after even 6 months to a year and saying, we use not only the concepts with ourselves, but we also tried that on our children, and we found that the children were getting excited. Because the fundamental reality in life is that if I don't know what excites me, nobody whether he's doing change management or speeches, can tell me what excites me. So I cannot create a compelling reason for somebody to change unless that person himself is looking for something to do that energizes and empowers him. So helping people discover that energy within themselves is, in my mind, the most powerful role of a change agent. Because once you have an energized employee on the ground, no matter what strategies you execute, the ability to deliver on that strategy improves drastically. And therefore, the outcome of your change becomes more successful. But unfortunately, most of our change programs don't deal with that part of the aspect. We are more about telling people what to do. This is the benefit of the organization. I mean, frankly, most organizations benefit most people don't connect with, right? They always connect with their own benefits. And then you start telling them, okay, you'll get better bonus. It's not a motivating factor. But if I forget the organization, let me create an empowered individual. And that individual will be like a bundle of energy. That itself becomes a powerful change. And I think that's where not too many organizations focus on this or do much about.
I think the reason for organizations not focusing on this part of empowering individuals or bringing that energy, because this could be a very, very long time taking effort, right? When organizations have to go through a rapid change, then they cannot afford to maybe work on that ground level to the individuals. Maybe it might be one of those reasons. Or what do you think could be other reasons that organizations are really not focusing in empowering every individual within the organizations while these kind of massive changes?
So one thing is, and actually what you correctly pointed out, does it take time? Now, in my experience, there are techniques in performance coaching and there are techniques and methods that you can use that actually doesn't make it a very long process. I mean, you can do typically things that are events that you can be launched for about even half a day. And you can easily scale that by creating or enabling people around you to actually be able to take that forward. Create some simple methods and tools where you start scaling it rather than leave it to 5 people doing it across the organization. What you do is you start scaling it by building it like an amoeba. You start identifying people who are initially getting excited by the concept, build them up and make them excite others. And then you excite those others who get excited to excite others. It becomes a chain reaction that can move very, very quickly. So speed is something that you can always strategize and build. So that, in my view, is not the challenge. But the bigger challenge that organizations have is this worry that an empowered employee or an excited employee may. So when you're creating an empowerment and excitement, you're also creating a certain amount of an ability to think on their own. And when you do that, organizations get concerned that this energy may totally shift away the focus from what they're trying to achieve. So in
So,
organizations, the biggest mindset of a leadership, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, please go ahead.
It's the organization, the biggest mindset a leader has, and this is where I think shifts need to happen, is we assume that we have all the answers and all we are wanting is people to follow what we are doing. But the reality is, I'm sitting on a leadership position. I really don't know what's happening on the ground. I only get filtered reports of what is happening. The real people who are actually doing work on the ground know the reality. So rather than me telling them what to do, it's easier for me to empower them and give them some broad conditions and give them a goal and have them achieve it. But leaders find that a very disempowering process and they get scared that they are not in control anymore. So it's more this fear psychosis that is not allowing this to happen.
It's interesting. You say like the kind of fear psychosis that's in the organization. Maybe that's also because when you empower individuals, as you mentioned, the action that might be in the other direction. Does that also mean that people will start thinking of themselves than the organizations when they become empowered?
Yes, and that's exactly the concern. And what I'm saying is that we shouldn't really be concerned about it because people. Nobody is really wanting to go out and destroy value in the company that they are in, right? I mean, if you assume that people are wanting to destroy value, they would have done that long ago, and there's very little you can do to control it. But it's this whole ego need to listen to what I say and get people to flow on a path of what I am saying is, I think, the biggest mindset change which leaderships need to have to realize that teams know what to do. You just need to create the right energies to make them do it.
Interesting. So what are the key things that plays a role in making the change last longer?
One is creating this amoeba effect of energy, like I said, where you create not only a bunch of 5 change agents who can drive it, but basically build this capability in as many employees as possible so that they can go about energizing, working with each other, and creating that energy in the company. That's one. The second thing that makes it lasting is if you train people to focus on making themselves successful, there's a higher probability of it lasting rather than focusing on training people to make a strategy successful. Because strategies will keep changing. The reality on the market will keep changing. So your strategy also going to get pretty much outdated in the next 3 to 6 months. So rather than train people on driving a strategy, train people to create their own ideas of how they can achieve those goals by making themselves successful in doing that. I think that's where the power shift has to happen. And that's where probably change becomes more lasting. And it's also true, if you take away the theory, see, if you hear of people who have worked in startups and companies that, like Google, for example, have many such examples where employees have been empowered and do exciting new things that make them feel that they're making a difference in what they are in the world they are in, creates far more energy and momentum than having a structured bunch of people following a regimen. So it's time and again proven as a formula, but very often it's this fear of how do we manage it that's not allowing organizations to actually use this idea and take it forward.
Yeah, it's interesting that you pulled the example of Google, right? Because they do have their different set of products that exclusively came from their employees by empowering the employees within the organizations, and that's where I was headed. Like, you also have experience in innovation thinking and helping businesses figure out the new ways to do business, right? So, how can an organization develop or build the culture of innovation within their system?
That's a very interesting concept, and I was actually having a very interesting conversation with the CEO of one company, and he says, how can I make my people very innovative and make them successful? And I asked a very simple question. I said, uh, let's assume that the innovation that you're driving was to fail. How much money are you willing to put as a loss for that failed innovation? And he turned around and said, why? All innovations should succeed. And that's precisely the problem of innovation, right? Because when you're looking at innovation, not all innovations are successful. We hear and read the success stories of innovation, but the reality in organizations is that 1 out of 10 innovations is likely to succeed and become successful. And that's
Mhm.
also the story of startups if you go ahead.
Yeah,
So what happens in large organizations is that we are only rewarded by success. And when you have a culture that punishes failure, you cannot drive innovation in that company.
very powerful. Yeah.
And therefore, putting that message that, it is okay to test out something. And once you've tested out, take the learnings from it. Even if it is not successful, you will start the seeds of people feeling comfortable in driving innovation. So the first thing is, like I said, create kind of a space for people to feel safe about failure. The second is not everybody is kind of excited about innovation. So there will be some companies, individuals in an organization who are more, I would say, risk taking, more excitable, more um, wanting to explore new things than many others. So finding these, what I typically call innovation sparklers in your company is the next key thing. So find those innovation sparklers in your company that you think are the kind of people you want to put into these teams to fire up that innovation. The third is actually to, you know, look at it very different. And it was very interesting. We were kind of doing work with a particular company, and they said, we really don't know where we are likely to be attacked from. So we created a small group of people and from this company, and we kind of asked them to ideate on if they were to be a startup and if they were to attack their own organization, which is the most vulnerable point of this organization that would be that would be impacted by a digital disruption. And in the space of a few days, the employees were able to identify 3 or 4 weak links in the organization that were vulnerable to digital disruption. And we call that as destroy your business. So that's the third part. Invite your own teams to attack your own company to find where those opportunities for innovation are,
Wow.
and then spark that as a startup, and then spark that as giving them a kind of a budget and a space to say, okay, now you're given an opportunity to cannibalize my organization, and therefore you use these digital innovations to try and then create that disruption that you need. And what I'm sharing is not something new. If you think of it, Amazon started off as a book company, and they realized that the um, digital world will destroy their book assets, and they created Kindle. So they disrupted their own business by their own digital technologies. So it's this ability of an organization to disrupt themselves will make them last longer rather than waiting for another startup to come and disrupt them.
Wow, that's a very, very just powerful point. I really love that. Like asking your employees to destroy your company, and coming out the innovative ideas to disrupt the ideas of the way company has been functioning. That's awesome. So let's switch the gears to digital transformation, and you have already ignited the conversation around that. So you are a thought leader on digital transformation, and your recent work is focused on that as well, including you are writing a book on digital transformation. So you talk about digital disruption, or what you may like to call digital tsunami. So what it is all about?
Actually, it's very interesting. When we were doing research, this was with the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. One very interesting thing came out from this research of this university. We always live in this fear that, oh, which is the next innovation that's going to destroy my business, and you don't know it, and a lot of people are talking about it. But the very interesting thing is that, disruption comes through what we call business model patterns. And throughout the history of business, there are only 57 business model patterns that have ever been invented that are actually kind of destroying or creating new business value. And I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
And these business model patterns, there is one called the razor and blade pattern. So if you think of Gillette as a company, they were the first
Mm-hmm.
people who started with making the razor cheap, but every time you bought the refill, that was the blade, it was expensive. So this is what we call the razor blade model. Now you think of the razor blade model, and you think of what has happened in the past few years. There's no new innovation that has happened. It's just that people have copied that pattern and have actually used that in their businesses. So Hewlett Packard, for example, they started copying this pattern by making printers cheap and refills expensive. And Nespresso did the same thing by making basically the coffee machine cheap and the coffee expensive. So all
Mm-hmm.
innovation comes from actually mixing up these 55 to 57 business model patterns that we have actually discovered. And innovation is about combining these business model patterns, adding to that the digital technologies, and seeing how this can then have a positive or a negative impact on a particular business, depending upon your strategy. And that's really the key to discovering new innovation. So I can give you another interesting example. So now
Mm-hmm.
the thing is, it's now of course become fairly popular, but in the old in the I think Google was the one to first start this. Actually, Amazon as well started this concept of making the services cheap, but then they started using your data to create insights. So data as a service, so data or information of people and consumers became an asset. And if you see in most organizations today, this has become a pattern that is getting replicated. People are using more and more data and insights that they are capturing. So data has suddenly become the new currency for the future. So again, this is another business model pattern that is getting replicated. So once you understand that these patterns exist, and you understand that if these 55 patterns are available for me, or 57 patterns, depending upon whether you are looking at the business model patterns from the St. Gallen University or from SAP, because we've added a few more patterns to that. You start being able to find out how you can combine these to create the next, I would say, tsunami of innovation that you were pointing to.
So, how can a business today can prepare themselves for the digital disruption that's happening rather than sitting down and worrying about the digital disruption coming in or the tsunami coming in?
Yeah, the first I would say is look at it from people. It's like I said, identifying these sparklers in your company to find out who are the people who can be your torch bearers to define that. The second is training these people to understand these patterns and define how these patterns can potentially impact the current business model of the company. The third is basically looking at all the new innovations that are happening in the business, particularly in digital technologies, to see how these digital technologies can then combine these patterns to create these digital disruptions, and then inviting these people to actually find those vulnerable points that would help you destroy your business, which would then spark the initiative of saying, okay, these are the 5 or 6 things that we would potentially need to do if we were to actually drive this new innovation in the company. And then putting it through what I typically call the Shark's Tank. So you need to create that innovation culture where you ask your employees not only to come up with ideas, but constantly filter them as a kind of a flowing, I would say, stream of ideas, so that you're constantly evaluating new ideas, testing them, validating them, dropping them, or adopting them, and going along. So creating this continuous culture and buzz and flow of new ideas will keep an organization alive and alert to all the new innovations that either are potentially coming towards them or they are creating to create new businesses and destroy other businesses that they are going to be impacting.
That's very interesting. Uh, a lot of insights over there. So, Lalit, now it's time for the enlightening round. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So, what inspires you to do everything that you do?
To me, it has to be personally exciting to me. So I love doing things that create energy, excitement, and a bit of, I've never done it before kind of feeling. And that's the perfect recipe to excite me.
Challenge yourself. So, which one daily habit do you believe has been game changer for you in your success journey?
The one is what I would typically say is my imaginative sense. So I tend to with whoever I meet and whatever I do, I try to find one thing that would be different, or if I could do this differently, what would that one thing be? So that whole discovery of that one thing difference, whether it's when I'm interacting with a customer to find out what's that new thing that this customer could start doing, which they've not been doing in the past, or if I'm talking within my own organization, what's the one thing that in the organization we could do that we've not done in the past, or if I'm talking to myself, what's the one thing that I could do differently that I've not done in the past, are things that I keep thinking about and keep trying. And that's what I think has helped me be where I am.
If you have to pick one book, I know that you might have a lot of books that has moved you or maybe helped you navigate through your own life. So if you have to pick one book that has left a deep impact on you or moved you, what would be that book?
Okay, so that book is The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt. So many years ago, when during my MBA school, I was actually kind of studying production management, and we had one professor, and I still remember that professor. He had I think third or fourth day of his lecture, he had announced in the class. He says, "These are the 5 students who are not going to complete their MBA because I'm not going to pass them." And one of them was me, and because I really struggled with production management. And then I read this book called Eliyahu Goldratt's The Goal. And what I liked about it was, in his very simple storytelling style, he explained this theory of constraints so well that I kind of understood it, not only understood it, but I was able to kind of excel at it. And I landed up doing very well in that production class. So I realized that storytelling and management can really come together. Management book shouldn't be all about theory. And I think that's the message for me that's kind of born me instead. And that's also defined my style of writing. And that's how actually I wrote this book as well. I wrote it more storytelling because that was what inspired me.
Would you like to recommend some online tool or resources that you use on a daily basis that has helped you in your self-help or personal development journey?
Not a tool that's helped me personally, but this I was sharing about the business model patterns. I think if you go to the University of St. Gallen and look at the business model patterns, if you are in the space of innovation and digital transformation, these patterns are very useful. I would recommend to the people who are not seen it so far to actually log on and find out about it and learn about it, because they are very interesting tools that you could use to drive innovation in your organization.
Would you like to give any messages to organizations, leaders, or maybe businesses who are looking forward to drive change or maybe a digital disruption, or anything that message that you'd like to give to these organization leaders or the business owners?
Yes, absolutely. So people, from a change point of view, the only one simple message I'd like to leave is, remember, change is driven by people on the ground. So the focus of any strategy should be to make your people more successful on the ground. Rather than telling them what to do, find out from them what would make them more successful, and support them in that journey. That's number one. If I was talking about digital innovation, to me, the first step of an innovation culture is to encourage risk taking and allowing people to create or a safe space for them to take those risks, and rewarding people for those risks is very critical. Otherwise, you will find that innovation will not come into your organization. And the third thing I would kind of say, more from a very overarching view, is that change and innovation are kind of interlinked. And once you've kind of seeded those initial um, tools of innovation, you will need to use a lot of the methods around change management to make that innovation scale to a point. Because remember, you will have the same kind of scenarios where there'll be a political impact, so there'll be leaders who have been used to being successful in a particular way, and your new internal innovation is going to threaten their power base because now you're coming up with a totally new idea. So managing those political dynamics that we talked about earlier, all those dimensions become equally relevant to drive an innovation to become successful within an organization and get adopted.
Amazing. So, Lalit, would you like to talk a bit about what your book, When Change Happen, is, and how can people basically reach out to you and learn more about you and your work?
Thank you for asking that question. So, When Change Happens is actually the story of a change agent as he navigates his journey through change. It's theory mixed with a interesting story. The character, in fact, has a love life as well. So there's a romance built into the story. It's the drama built into the story. So it's not a dry read on change management. It's talking about the adventures of a person through a change journey. So that's what I would like to kind of leave with the readers to explore this book as a read that provides not only insights but also entertains them on the way. For reaching out to me, I have a website, When Change Happens. Please link to that website, and my latest blogs will be on it, as well as the links to where my books are available is also there. And I'm happy to respond and reach out to you if you are able to write on your comments on that site. And I'm looking forward to engaging with people.
Guys, make sure that you get in touch with Lalit. Get his book on Amazon. I'm going to link everything up on the show notes page of this episode at theinspiringtalk.com/5353. So, Lalit, here's the last question for you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Imagine that you are standing on a stage which is the largest ever built in the history of the world, and every single seat on that stadium is occupied, and people out there, like there are millions of people, and they are listening to you very, very carefully, and you were given only 1 minute of time to share the most important lesson that you have learned in your life. What would be your message?
I would say follow your dream and be sure about what is it that makes you feel empowered, and focus on that. You will be successful.
Follow your dreams. I really enjoyed having this conversation, Lalit. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Hey guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you learned something or got some inspiration. If you did, make sure to share this episode with your friends by visiting theinspiringtalk.com/5353. I have linked all the resources and links on the show notes page of this episode at theinspiringtalk.com/5353. That is theinspiringtalk.com/53. And if you have some suggestions or feedback for this podcast, you can record your message by visiting theinspiringtalk.com/speak. That is theinspiringtalk.com/speak. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you in the next. Now, go out there and do something inspiring.